Welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here for this December first Friday at Fusion Studio. I'm Rich Dione. I'm the co-director of the Fusion Studio. With me here is...
I'm Mercer Applin. I'm an assistant professor of audio technology in the Department of Theater and Dance here at Purdue and audio technologist for the Fusion Studio.
Exactly. And we are here once again in the John Martinson Entertainment and Engineering Labs here at Purdue University. Welcome to this first Friday. We have with us today Chuck Filson, who is a senior control systems engineer at Prism Systems, where he leads motion control design for animatronics and ride vehicles across major themed entertainment projects. With previous experience at ITEC Entertainment and a Purdue Bachelor of Science in Mechanical Engineering, Boiler Up, he brings decades of hands-on experience from character shows at Six Flags, which we just heard a little bit about, to world-class ride systems. We're going to turn it over to Chuck, who's going to give us a little bit of a slide deck tour through some projects and some of what he works with. As always, if you have questions, throw them up in the Q&A or in the chat, and we'll insert them when there's an opportune time. But with that, Chuck, thanks so much for being here, and we'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you guys. Thanks for the glowing introduction. Wow, I need to. It's all lies and misinformation is what the truth is. I'm just a monkey with a keyboard, and they just let me keep doing stuff until something breaks. So thank you very much for inviting me. I'm very excited to be here. We were talking a little bit before that this didn't exist when I was at Purdue. I graduated in 2017. So I think this is awesome to see the opportunity. What was so hard when I was coming up in school at Purdue, trying to get integrated into this industry, whether it's live entertainment or theme parks. It's like you're in West Lafayette, Indiana. It's really, really hard to meet people and, build those connections. So the fact that there's a network now and there are classes, like I think it's awesome. So I'm very excited to be here to try to contribute to, try to give back to it. So very, very excited. Thank you guys for having me. I'm going to put my slide deck on the screen and let me know when you guys can see it.
We're good.
Cool. Yeah, so I put some slides together just mainly to keep myself on track because I will fly off the rails if I don't have something to kind of guide me along. And I'm really put it together to try to inspire conversation from the larger audience. I'd rather hear from other people and try to answer questions rather than just opine about whatever pops into my head. So please feel free to ask whatever questions, even if you think the pictures are pretty. And I will also say this, because this is very important. All of these images I got from Google. None of these are from actual site photos. I may or may not have worked on some of these rides. Most of them I did not work on. So just want to say that for the general audience and the lawyers that want to come after me later who think that I'm bragging a little too much. So with that, we'll get started. Let's see here. Okay, the boring stuff. Who am I? What's my background? Just so you kind of know who's talking. So I graduated from Purdue in 2017. Great time at Purdue. I think I was the first class where tuition was frozen, which is crazy. I see the updates on LinkedIn every once in a while that it's another year of tuition frozen. So that's wild to me that you guys, for the students on the call, that you're paying the same amount that I was when I went to school. So that's really cool. I actually did not get a job in entertainment right away coming out of school. I went to go work for a company called B&R, which is kind of like Allen Bradley or like Siemens. They make PLCs, they make IO, they make safety controllers, they make servo drives and HMIs and all that stuff. The reason I went to go work for them was because I wanted to learn as a mechanical engineer how to do the controls, how to do the software, how to look at systems and design systems. It was something that I wasn't going to get a job coming out of school as a mechanical engineer to do because there's this weird stigma in the industry that you have to be an electrical engineer if you're going to work in control systems. I'll tell you that's a lie. So I work with way more mechanical engineers than anybody else. But that time I worked a lot in industrial manufacturing. So a lot of steel manufacturing up in the Midwest, laser cutters, roll forming machines for cold rolling steel, that kind of stuff. So a lot of big servo VFD applications. Gave me a really good foundation in motion control for the stuff that I would eventually get into now in theme parks. So very, very grateful to the guys at BNR and ABB for all that experience. Then I went to ITEC Entertainment, which shortly after became TAIT Towers when the original owners sold to TAIT Towers. ITEC specifically was a theme park engineering company. They built mostly show systems, animatronics, show control systems, safety supervisory systems, all that stuff, and a good number of ride systems for Universal Studios, almost exclusively Universal Studios. TAIT Towers, in addition to all of that stuff that they got with ITEC, I think most people here may have heard of TAIT, where you probably haven't heard of ITEC. TAIT does all the big rock and roll pop show stuff. They are the cream of the crop when it comes to live performance. The example I like to use is the Super Bowl a couple of years ago when Rihanna was on those floating platforms and all that. So the winches that moved those platforms, well, the decks that were floating were built by TAIT. The winches were built by TAIT. The software was all TAIT. The show's operated by TAIT and the TAIT crew. So that's the kind of stuff that TAIT does. Anybody that works in
I remember
Disneyland
watching that halftime show and
Yeah.
texting my pal who's at TAIT and going, "This is you guys, right?" He's like, "Yep, talking to my team right now." So yeah, absolutely, it was great.
Yeah. I mean, they do wild stuff. And so they do everything from, Taylor Swift's tour. I was at Coldplay earlier this year and got to see that. I think if Thanksgiving just happened, if you watched the Thanksgiving Day parade or the halftime show with Jack White and Eminem, that was all TAIT. All those wristbands that you see in the audience that are glowing up and syncing with the music, that's all TAIT software. That's all their stuff. So they do really cool stuff there. I was mainly working in theme parks down here in Orlando because I was part of the ITEC team. Spent a bunch of time at Universal in Japan. Spent a ton of time in Singapore. Worked on a good number of cruise ships. Did cool stuff there. I got to get off this slide. I'm talking way too long. Now I'm at Prism. So I went from being on the show side to being on the ride side. So I mostly worked on animatronics and ride control at ITEC, and decided that I really wanted to focus on more ride control, which is more of what Prism does, and wanted to get a little more experience outside of Universal. TAIT, or I should say ITEC mostly works with Universal. I wanted a little bit more Disney experience, so I got a good mixture now between the two companies. That's where I am now. All right. So what do I do? I guess I kind of went off on a little while there. I'm going to bring you an old meme because it's one of my favorite memes. This in a nutshell, I was going to let this image kind of sink in. Pretty much everybody who's not me just thinks I ride roller coasters all day. And I think that's an experience that a lot of us who work in the industry feel. What we think we do is work on really cool animatronics that scare people and do all this cool stuff. And realistically, all we really do is work on paperwork. That's whether it's a drawing package or a theory of operation or a hazard analysis, it's all documentation at the end of the day. So, but actually what I do, so control systems engineers, if you're not familiar with what a control system engineer does, is we are the brain of the system, right? So you have a big ride that has ride vehicles moving around, and you have audio, and you have projectors, and you have all these components. They're all not worth anything unless they're designed and programmed and have something talking to them that tell them how to work with the other pieces of the system, right? How to all work in Congress together. So it gives me a really cool, unique view where, a ride vendor, they might design a ride vehicle mechanically, and it's really cool. It's cooler than the stuff I can come up with. But they don't really know how it works with the show, right? They don't know how it's going to work with the audio. They don't know. They don't necessarily have the final product in their head. That's where the control system kind of gets to see over the whole mixture that ends up becoming a ride. So we do a lot of drawings. I don't know if you guys can see my mouse, but we do a lot of drawings. Those drawings end up becoming control panels that have a whole bunch of components in them to make them work. And then we make a ton of these that all have to work together for each of the individual systems. On top of that, we also write all the software, or most of the time we write the software. And then we also, part that a lot of people don't really realize, I know when I meet control systems engineers or people who are not control systems engineers, if they know anything about the technical of what we do, they think it's just electrical and software. And there's a whole bunch of system design around safety, hazard analysis, risk assessments, theories of operation, requirements gathering that goes into making these attractions safe and efficient. That's pretty much what I do. So, yeah. So who do I work with? Obviously, I've been talking about the big two companies that are in the theme park industry. I've done a lot of other stuff outside in the last few years. Did work a little bit on the MSG Sphere, or a portion of it. That was another TAIT, another big TAIT project. Did some work with Norwegian Cruise Line, some stuff for Warner Brothers Abu Dhabi. Spent a bunch of time in Singapore, working at an opera house in Singapore. And then I actually did an interactive museum up in North Carolina. If anybody knows who Billy Graham is, he's got a museum up in North Carolina that they did an interactive deal with. So there's a whole interactive walkthrough that you do, and we're getting projectors to all sync with. There's an animatronic cow. There's lighting cues that change as you walk through the space. There's a giant spherical globe projector. It's cool. It's cool. You should check it out.
Of course, an animatronic cow. That's exactly what there would be.
Yeah.
I have no idea for what, but sure.
Yeah, she's special. She's a special girl.
Now I gotta go.
Yeah, you absolutely do. She sings. She'll sing in French if you ask her.
It's getting better and better.
He's getting better.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so that's enough of the boring stuff. Let's talk rides. What are rides nowadays? Because we're pretty far away from the Coney Island days where, you hop on a little 2-seater wooden roller coaster and it takes you to the top of the hill and it lets you go and you ride your way through, right? Rides are way more sophisticated today. So we've got roller coasters. Those still exist. I know I just kind of ragged on them a little bit, but they still exist. You go to a Six Flags park, you go to Cedar Fair. I guess they're one company now. They still have a ton of those rides, but you've got show coasters like you have on Hagrid's, where it's like a full production, right? You have onboard audio on the vehicle and Hagrid's talking to you, and you go and find all these animatronics. You encounter Fluffy, there's track switches that are moving you around. You're changing directions. And honestly, like, one of my favorite images is this set piece that you fly through the old castle. Like, this is not just a Six Flags ride, not to rag on Six Flags, but definitely a way bigger production now than they used to be. There's water flume rides too. I got a picture of Cali River Rapids, Jurassic Park, which I'll talk about later on in the presentation. Is a big log flume ride. So it's not just something on rails. You're just kind of floating in water through a thrill ride. Obviously, dark rides have gotten wild now in terms that most of them are trackless. They just drive around in open space and they can go to different scene areas and adapt, depending on what the throughput of the day is. It's absolutely crazy stuff. And a lot of them have interactives on them. I think specifically about Men in Black here in Orlando, where not only is it a trackless vehicle, but there's a game system on the ride vehicle and you're shooting at targets, and there's a wayside controller that's picking up you shooting and coordinating with your gun and keeping score for you and your seat that's presented to you at the end, right? All wirelessly. It's crazy technology. What a time to be alive is really all I have to say to that. So,
do you mind if I interrupt really quickly?
Yeah.
And maybe we're going to talk about this because I see you're moving right into this business about Pirates of the Caribbean. But we did one of these with Logan Zawicki, I think is his last name. I forget, from Sally Dark Rides about a year and a half ago, and he talked about a ride project he worked on related to Sesame Street, the IP of Sesame Street. We had a really fun conversation about like the the challenges of working with a particular IP that's really, really well known to the audience.
Mm,
And of course, he was talking about it from the sort of design of the decor and the interaction. From your perspective as a controls engineer, how much does understanding of the IP, the expectations of the audience around the IP, a particular IP, how much does that play into the work that you have to do in thinking about the
yeah,
controls?
that's a great question. That's a really wonderful question. So honestly, not a whole lot.
Okay,
Not from my standpoint. Um, our and I'll cover this maybe a little later in the presentation if we get to it. When it comes to safety, really the name of the game for us is safety. I think
gotcha.
above all else, we are focused on, okay, first thing is not only do the guests getting on this ride have to be safe, which is very challenging to make a ride safe. Um, the the people who have to maintain this ride, whether it's the vehicle or the props inside of it, their safety is also critical.
Hmm.
And there's only so much only so much training you can give to people that makes something like that safe. So at the front of our minds, that's always the first thing. It's like, hey, it
Sure.
would be really cool if we could come up with like a floating ride vehicle, but if we can't find a way to make it safe, then even though the IP may call for a floating ride vehicle. I can't think of an IP off the top of my head that would require that. But like, sorry guys, and that's a key point of tension between. And part of the reason why I included it in today's presentation is I know there are going to be a lot of creative folks. And there's always a lot of tension between creative and engineering because creative has a vision for what this ride needs to be. And then engineering comes in and says, well, hold on a second. Like either that's too much, it's too expensive, it's not safe, it's not this, that, the other thing. There's feasibility. And so there's always going to be that tension that kind of lives there.
Sure.
It's very funny to me when I'm working on a ride that's maybe an obsolescence project and everybody gets really excited. You see your projects in the news and everybody's getting, or on social media, people get really excited and they're like, oh, what's the update gonna be, and what's it gonna be like? And it's like the
Sure.
controls are just 20 years old and they're swapping them out. They're not changing creative. They're not, like I'm really sorry to disappoint you guys, but it's not really changing. And it happens
Yeah,
on the
you
flip
won't notice the
side.
difference, but
You
yeah,
won't see it. Yeah, maybe the animatronic moves a little smoother than it
yeah,
did. More than likely,
interesting.
all the axes on the animatronic are going to work now for a couple months before they eventually break down again. That's all that's really going to be noticed, right? Not everything.
Yeah.
The classic example of that, I think, is like Jurassic World. Every time that Universal touches one of the Jurassic Park IPs now, everybody thinks they're going to get the Jurassic World upgrade that they did in Hollywood.
Mhm.
And so there's always some disappointment when they're leaving it Jurassic Park. Everybody wants the IREX now. Everybody wants
Got it. Yeah.
the big video wall and all that.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think that answered your question.
I think so. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, unfortunately, it doesn't really affect them. Now, for me personally, I like to know. I mean, it drove me wild on a couple of projects that there were people, and I won't name names, and I can't name the IP, but there are people working on a project on our side and on the client side who had never seen the movie, right?
Oh,
Interesting.
That blew my mind. That like, hey, and it wasn't that they were doing it, but they weren't. It wasn't like I don't even know what to say. It wasn't even that they were misunderstanding. I mean, we're not. The example that kind of comes to mind is like fans of The Witcher may know that like there's been some controversial decisions in the last couple seasons of The Witcher on Netflix and questions about how much do the story writers really know about the IP of The Witcher. That doesn't really
mm.
happen on a theme park ride. It's kind of hard to mess with the lore of a story too much, I think. Again, at least from my perspective, it sounds like there are others in the industry who may have had other experiences with that. And I'll also say, again, long-winded answer, it also changes culture to culture,
Hmm.
right? So the
Sure.
expectations in Japan for a certain attraction. Like we've worked on attractions in Japan that they love that are not big IPs here, that they don't want an upgrade of the ride. They don't want to see the sequel. They want to see the original, right?
Interesting.
They don't want it changed. So it does depend on kind of where you are in the world, right?
Yeah.
How collaborative is the process between you as the control system designer and those who are designing the concept for an animatronic feature or another feature? Do you have input into what can feasibly be controlled? I know you were talking about on the safety aspect. You can certainly say we can't do that safely, but are there aesthetic considerations that you're also trying to balance with those folks?
Yes. The short answer is yes. It entirely depends on, frankly, how the contract's laid out, and who's the vendor responsible for what. Disney works very differently from the way Universal does in terms of how they build attractions and who's responsible for the attraction at the end of the day. And different departments inside the companies will work a little differently in terms of how they choose to bring in outside help to work on something. I've worked on projects where, I should say first and foremost, the big decisions go through Universal and Disney. They're the ones who make the creative decisions. They're the one who have the creative intent. That doesn't come from us. When I worked at TAIT and when I part of what I worked at ITEC, there are companies who will bring in TAIT as a creative vendor, right? There's a whole design studio. So people in your audience may know that, Thinkwell was acquired by TAIT. Thinkwell is a huge creative house. And so all those creative clients, like they provide creative services for companies that want to do something really big and really cool, make a big interactive space or something, but they don't have a Walt Disney Imagineering on staff. They don't have a Universal Creative on staff, and they don't want to go hire one, right? They want to hire somebody out who has some experience. So at the end of the day, like I don't want to offend anybody from Universal or Disney and try to take credit for anything. They are the ones who have the creative intent. We come in as subject matter experts when it comes to controls a lot of the time. And so somebody will say, hey, we've got this, I'm trying to think of some example off the top of my head. Let's say I got to see a picture on my screen here of this guy pulling the drowning dude out of the well. Let's say we want to pull this guy up out of the well and he weighs 5 tons for some reason, right? What would it take for us to move something like that? And we're the ones who have to come back and say, well, like, here's what it would take, but also, why is it 5 tons? Why can we talk about, can we work together here to find what's a way better solution for everybody at the end of the day, right? So there is collaboration. We're certainly in those meetings as far as we're included in those meetings. At the end of the day, most of the time it's, well, we want you to design a control system and we just want a box at the end of the day. So that can happen too. It just kind of depends on the group.
Great. I think that helped answer that question.
Okay. Perfect. Okay. Well, for the sake of brevity here, these next few slides were just my way of saying, hey, everything that starts, again, from this creative perspective, it all starts with a story. Every one of these rides, even, I had a picture of Raging Bull from my home park, that's just a roller coaster. There is something of a story, right? You're getting on a bull and you're going to go ride this bull. That's kind of the story of the thing, right? The whole queue looks like a ranch, and there's always a story being told, which is part of what I love about theme parks, is that especially at like a Disney or a Universal, when you're in the queue, you're being told a story. Like, you're entertained in the queue of a ride. You're not just standing around waiting aimlessly. If you pay attention to it, there's so much production value goes in, and Guardians of the Galaxy is one of my favorite attractions for that reason, because it's such a long wait, but you have all these story elements of like, okay, why are we here? What are we doing? Oh, we're being transported to a ship somewhere. We're going across the galaxy. Okay. Oh no, we're stuck, right? The bad guy has stolen the cosmic generator and we have no way to get home. And now we have to go get the cosmic. Oh, the Guardians of the Galaxy are going to help us do that. And that's the wild adventure that we're taking on to get to that point. So, it's more than just a roller coaster. It's a really cool experience and a story. You get to go on a little adventure. That's what it's all about. So, Pirates of the Caribbean is a great example. Simple though it is, you're going to Tortuga and you're going to go see, are you fit to be a pirate? Could you live in conditions like this where everything's burning down, right? Jurassic Park is another great story. So a lot of people don't know Jurassic Park, the ride, was in development before the script was written for the movie. Steven Spielberg started. There's a famous attraction in Universal Florida called Confrontation, and there was a large animatronic figure of Kong that Steven Spielberg wrote it and thought, wow, this is crazy. And he started learning about all the hydraulics behind how this animated Kong worked. And he was also reading Jurassic Park at the time, and he told the executives at Universal in charge of the park and said, you should turn this into a ride. There's this scene in the book that would be a great ride. And you guys could do what you're doing over here at Kong and do it with dinosaurs, right? So there's concept art that predates the script for Jurassic Park. It was only after the fact that Spielberg said, oh, I think we could actually make an animated figure for the movie and do that. So a little fun Universal history there that a lot of people don't know. But the story, if it's ever playing anymore, is that John Hammond is trying to recreate Jurassic Park again after the failures of the first movie, and Universal Studios has helped him do that. And you're going to go on this peaceful river ride, and of course it is until it's not, and you end up having to confront all your crazy dinosaurs, go down the drop and do all that. Last good example is Revenge of the Mummy. That's one of my favorites here in Orlando. The whole concept is you're on the movie set for the Mummy sequel and things keep going awry. If you pay attention in the pre-show, there's all these weird happenings going on. And the whole point of the ride is that Imhotep and the curse are real and he's chasing you the whole ride. And you're encountering all these cool effects, the flame systems, the launch for the gravity zone, because it's actually a roller coaster. It's a wild ride when it was made in the early 2000s. Like it's a cool attraction. So there's lots of creative stuff. It all starts with that story, that blue sky idea of this is what we want to do. Right. Okay. So now getting into the bits and bobs. So creative comes up with this idea. How do we make that thing actually work? Right? How do we make this feasible? The first thing you need a ride system, right? There's a funny joke is that there's no ride without the ride, right? Everybody, you get all these people, all these different vendors coming to work together, all these different groups inside the big two companies that work on audio, they work on video, they work on lighting, they work on animatronics, they work on scenic, they do network, the network team and all this. All of it falls by the wayside, no pun intended, until the ride is like fleshed out, right? Mechanically, structurally, controls wise. It has to be done because otherwise you just have a really cool walkthrough. And that might be what you're into, but it has to be a functioning ride at the end of the day. So we need a track. Somebody's got to design that. You need vehicles, or I should say now you don't even, because if it's not a roller coaster, if it's a dark ride, now a lot of vehicles are trackless. That gets into a whole business around, okay, how do we drive this thing with no constraints? What happens if we put the bumpers down on this bowling alley, right? And that ball can go anywhere. Well, let's not end up in the gutter. How do we make sure we don't end up in the gutter? For tracked rides, there are track switches. And how do you make sure, get into safety discussions later, but how do you make sure that track switches are mated correctly so that you don't send a vehicle into an open track switch, right? Or even better, a lot of track switches nowadays happen while you're riding, right? So a lot of people might think of a traditional track switch for a railroad or for, even a simple roller coaster. It's kind of the thing that lets you peel off to go to the maintenance bay, right? It's kind of left in the regular position during the day and nothing really happens with it. But if you've ridden Hagrid's down here in Orlando, you might know that there's a section where you're going forwards and then all of a sudden you're going backwards. And so that's happening while you're riding. You go through a certain section and then the track switches, right? While you're moving. So how do we, when we talk about safety later, how do we make sure that you're in this gravity zone, that we don't send you into an open track switch? What's the safety around that? So, and then there's things like station management. How do we get people on and off the ride? How do we make sure that nothing's moving while you're on the ride, while you're getting on and off of it? How are we dead sure that nothing is going to move while you're getting on and off of it is a really difficult challenge. And then a lot of people don't know this, is that a lot of the time when you're getting on a ride vehicle, it's actually charging. So there's lots of fun considerations now that all these vehicles have onboard audio and onboard lighting. That power has to come from somewhere. Batteries are really, really heavy and they don't maintain charge throughout a day really well. So we actually use like super capacitors now, that when you come into the station, we're charging that super capacitor, and that capacitor will last for several minutes because you're only going around the track for 2-3 minutes. But every time you come back in, that vehicle's charging. And so how do you maintain safety while you're getting onto a charging vehicle, right? Electrically, how do you design? So all considerations, right? I threw up a couple of photos here, some of the sensors and motors that, when you start thinking about, okay, how do we move a ride vehicle through the station? How do you move a ride vehicle around the track? You need motors and sensors. These are some examples of some of those things we would use. I have a picture of some brakes too. How do we handle braking a ride vehicle? How do we stop? How do we know that we've stopped? Things like that. And then a couple of some of my favorite rides and some of the cool ride vehicle systems, right? Obviously, Rock and Roller Coaster is if you don't know that ride, it's Rock and Roller Coaster down here down in Disney World. One of the early limb launch systems for a ride vehicle, it shoots you down this tunnel, and that's how you get sent into the gravity zone. And then down here is Men in Black, which I mentioned a little bit earlier. Is not only is it a vehicle that drives around in free space, but it's also got a game system associated with it that you're shooting aliens in the simulator as you go around. That's a ride system. Oh, that's not supposed to be there. That's cool. Next, show system. So now you've got a ride system. What's all the show bits? Because remember, we're now not just talking about a roller coaster, right? We need all these show elements that need to work with the ride. So we've got AVL, onboard and offboard, audio, video, lighting. There are so many people down here in Orlando that work in AVL, and it's super popular. I think every theater I've ever worked on has lighting. Folks, that's maybe a little obvious, but people don't necessarily think about the video, the amount of video that gets used in theaters nowadays. So huge and wonderful. I made many, many friends in that side of the industry, working together with them. So a lot of times those vendors are separate. AVL is a separate vendor from what we work on, but we work very closely together. Typically the control system, the show controller will fall under the control system, where AVL is parallel or is just a slight subsidiary, a slight follower to the show. The show controller will send cues off, because what the show controller is doing at the top is watching where all the ride vehicles are. So it's getting where are all the ride vehicles and what needs to, who do I need to be triggering, or what do I need to be triggering for who in this ride? The AVL vendor doesn't worry about that. They just worry about making the screen look the best that it can, get the audio to sound just right, tune all the audio in the venue. I have on here that there's also special effects. There's lots of special effects vendors, particularly out in Hollywood, that do flames and fog and LN2, and there's water water spritzing effects, there's spark effects. There's a ton that I'm not even thinking of. All that stuff has to be coordinated with where the ride vehicle is. There's actually I was working on a ride recently where we were tuning the show timing with the AVL team, and we kept getting this fog blast kept firing after the ride vehicle would leave. And we would laugh because we'd be sitting in the TD booth watching the CCTV of the ride vehicle go by, and we would watch it and like, oh, is it gonna go? Is it gonna go? And it would always fire after the ride vehicle turned. It was always very funny. It was the ghost effect. Pretty cool. And then lastly on that is animated props, animated figures, right? That's the one that everybody kind of thinks of when they think special effects and show control is, oh, we want to see the animated figures. And obviously I work a lot with figures, so it's really fun for me. They are not as complicated as you might think. But the manufacturing that goes into them is really, really impressive, especially nowadays, especially as small as things have gotten. And I was at Hollywood Studios the other night. They have a Walt Disney World walk-through kind of history museum inside Hollywood Studios right now, and Abe Lincoln is there. I got him right there on my screen, is Abe. So he's in there, the original, and they have the console, the programming console for it. And it's just a ton of rotary pots for every one of the axes and buttons for every one of the digital axes. And then you could turn on record mode and you could play with the dial. You could play the show and you could rotate the dial and record. You have to individually record the show profile by just rotating the pot while the recorder's going. And then they would save it and they'd go on to the next axis. And I know I don't do a ton of figure programming. That's typically like a show programmer will come in after we're done and program the figure. So they'll have like real animators come in and work with the animated figure. And so a lot of them do that to this day. There's a lot of cool things that people do by animating in like Maya or some other animation software. I don't know if Blender today is doing animations or anything like that, but I know Maya is the big one. So they'll make an animation in Maya and then they'll export it to the controller, or they might program it with a set point generator and stream that to the controller to send all the set points for all the axes in real time during the show. But what a lot of people like to do is they like to sit there with a little lighting board that has a bunch of dimmers on it, and they'll sit there and they'll program by moving the faders, and they'll go one axis at a time until they like it. So I don't know, this is kind of going off on a tangent a little bit there, but that's
wild. I had no idea it was still so low tech to some extent. I was wondering if there was some sort of motion capture overlay or something that could be done to make that process a little more streamlined. But wow, that's fascinating.
And I don't know, there have been a lot of really cool figures that have gone in over at ITEC Universe. And I didn't work on any of those. So I'm not giving up the goat or anything here, but so I don't know what they did over there. I don't know how those figures work. I know the companies that did work on them. I've met with a few friends that have, but so I don't think those were programmed that way. I think if you've seen any of it, for anybody that's on the call, if you've seen how cool those figures are, how dynamic they are, how they can move in space, it is wild. And I recommend that everybody go and watch the ITEC Universe on Peacock. Epic Ride, I think is what it's called. Go check that out because it's really cool. So, some of those more high-tech ones, for sure, maybe still doing it. I know I've done refurbishments for animatronics where somebody will hook up not an oscilloscope, but a recorder that's just two probes on an analog sensor, because a lot of the old animatronics just have a string pot or a rotary pot that is its encoder that gives you the position of that axis, right? So they'll hook up probes on either end and record as the show profile plays because they don't have the original show profile. And so they'll record all those and then they give that to you and say, here's your show. And that's always fun because they're all 0 to 10 volt, which is awful for anybody who's interested or knows. 0 to 10 volts is highly susceptible to noise, especially over long distances, which in theme parks they typically are because the figure's out there and the control system's way back there where you can't see it. So you get a really, really noisy signal on an old potentiometer, and you go, what am I supposed to do with this? Do we reprogram? No, they want the old show. We can't reprogram. So like, what do you do? You gotta get creative when those moments come up. Yeah, so that's show system. Gonna cruise on right along here. Show set and scenic. The only one I think I really need to show is Forbidden Journey, also down here in Florida. If anybody's familiar with it, some of the coolest show set pieces that are, I think, in the theme park world. They really went above and beyond to create what looks like Hogwarts Castle inside. And you get to see all the examples of rock work and fiberglass work, all the audio video lighting that gets done. Really, really cool. I don't get to interact with those other than the AVL side. We don't get to do a ton. But really, really cool stuff. And I get to, mostly I put this on here is because when we're on site having to install, we're still fighting with these people to get the space on site to work around, or like, hey, we need the projector because we need to focus the projector over here, right? How are we gonna work together to accomplish that? Couple more examples, I guess, that are not Harry Potter, right? Just some of the scenic work, if you're interested in it, it is so cool. There's so many talented people that have to go from a concept drawing to making Bowser's castle, or, Moana's Journey of Water down here, which actually has a lot of controls in it because all the water is interactive, right? So Disney Imagineering went in, and not only do you have all this beautiful scenic, you have to have a water treatment facility. You have to have sensors around. You have to have water pumps that are individually controlled because the kid over here might be doing one thing, kid over here is doing another thing, right? Like there's all that has to work together. Really cool. There's lots of networking. If you're an IT nerd, there's tons of networking, and there's lots of safety questions. One question that's been brought up the last several years is, what happens if somebody hacks a ride? Like what do we do? How do we safely respond? How do we detect that? How do we respond to it if it happens? Right? Doesn't matter. Some rides it might not matter. Some rides it does matter. I think everything nowadays has some kind of safe interrupt for bizarre network traffic. It's very funny when you're commissioning a ride because you'll be working and they will have turned it on, and you go to connect to whatever controller and you shut the ride down because they turned it on, and then everybody's yelling at you because you're the MAC address that set off you're the suspicious network activity. I've done that a few times. Yeah, super, super fun. And then, yeah, the bits that nobody ever really thinks about, right? So for a dark ride or even a roller coaster, there's so much facility that's involved that you don't see. There's HVAC that happens. There's all the electrical. I remember I don't know if I should tell this story. We tripped the main breaker for a land accidentally. Don't actually know how it happened. We never found what the fault was, but the main breaker got tripped for a movie, for an IP that was very famous for the power going out. Very funny to me. I made lots of jokes about it. The folks I was working with did not understand my humor, but it's a real thing. The power distribution, especially for control systems, power distribution through a facility it gets messy, right? Because we've got high voltage signals for, your standard wall outlets, 120. We might have 230 and 480 also coming into the building for large power systems to handle all the hydraulics and handle all the electrical in the building. A lot of temperature systems will operate on high voltage too, for ones where you need large heaters. And then you've got all your low voltage stuff too, 24 volts. Sometimes you get down to 12 and 5 volts too, that get fun. So electrical turns into a mess. Hydraulic, for anything that is a hydraulic figure or a hydraulic prop. I had a picture actually of Waterworld. They launched that plane up over the wall and into the pool with a giant hydraulic piston. That's how they move it. And so you have to have hydraulic filtering, you have to have a reservoir, you have to have temperature control for that, and a means to generate all that pressure. That's a standalone system. Water treatment is the same way, right? Any water ride that you're on, all that water is treated on site at that facility. At least the ones that I've worked on all work that way. You've got LN2 systems, flame systems that need fueling daily. I've heard rumors about how much liquid nitrogen costs, and some parks that may or may not have thought about building their own LN2 processing plants. Again, I don't know. It's just a rumor that I heard. I'm happy to perpetuate the rumor, whether they did or they didn't. And then there's fire detection and suppression systems, and how all that stuff has to work together with the control system in an evac situation or anything like that. So all the bits and bobs that people don't think about when you're getting on a ride, like, oh, there's a building here that is like it's a real building. It's permitted and everything. Like, it has to be safe to walk in. There's people who work 24 hours a day just maintaining that show building or maintaining that ride perimeter to make sure that everything inside of it's safe. Yeah. So kind of gets into the safety discussion here at the very end. I'm almost done jabbering. So I guess in all of that I was talking about, there's always the big question of, where we start is what can go wrong, right? It's always a question on top of our minds. Like, we do all the programming and the design later on down the process, but very early on with the creative folks and with probably more so with engineering, we're having the conversations with them of what goes wrong, right? What hazards are present? What are we exposing people to when we put somebody on this ride? What can happen? When do we stop? How do we stop? How do we reset? Are we sure that we stopped? Like, how do we get through all that? And then once you're done having those discussions around, because at the end of the day, as the control system, as the brain, the reason why this is important, as the brain of the system, we are usually, unless you can make the hazard go away by design, which is very rare. One example that comes to mind is the overhead thwomps at Epic Universe. If you go walking through Mario Land, there's like thwomps overhead that are falling. Like, there's a huge discussion needs to happen of like, hey, unless you take that thwomp off the wall, if you're going to ask people to walk under that to go to the bathroom, what hazards are present, right? And then from there, you need to have it. Once you've identified all those hazards, there's a long discussion around failure modes. Okay, so we're going to put X number of bolts in this. I am a mechanical engineer, but I don't I don't design the mechanical anymore. But like, how many bolts do we need to put in this so that it handles the shear stress over the operating life of this thing? And what's the factor of safety need to be? Okay, cool, we've done that. Okay, now one of those bolts shears prematurely. Like, we got to start going down all the list of things that can go wrong so that we don't have like a Chernobyl on our hands where something unfortunately happens. And, so those discussions take a really long time. Those discussions start happening as soon as the work's been awarded and we're starting to look at the control system. From concept design, we're talking about like, okay, what can happen? And that eventually all boils down into not only the safety functions that we have to make sure are part of the ride, but also part of the acceptance testing. Right. When we go to talk to Universal and they say, okay, like, you're done, handshake, thank you, here's your check. It's, how do we know that all the things that we've been talking about for the last 3 years have been done? Right. And it all boils down to a lot of those documents that I'm kind of referring to here. So these are just examples from screenshots that I took on the internet. These are not, I know the one on the left is an OSHA hazard analysis for like a job site. hazard for like a construction site, which is a little different, but it's kind of the same thing, right? We start looking at what are the different hazards in the activity that's going on here. What's the severity? How often does it occur? How frequently are we exposing people to it? And that helps us tabulate and determine, okay, well, what's really, really important that we need to mitigate. And you do the same thing for failure modes. Once you've gone through, and one of my favorite failure modes is what happens when the PLC loses power, right? Which is should be nothing, because if your PLC loses power, it should be a fail-safe design, and nothing should happen. They always make us test it, and it's funny to me. But yeah.
How do you reach a level of confidence that, not that you've thought of everything that can go wrong, but that you've, thought of the major issues? I feel like, with the amount of variables and with the amount of different people kind of working in the same world, generating this list must be, take years and years, as you said, from the beginning of the contract.
It's huge, and it's always changing. And what's very funny is that when you get new people on a project, all of a sudden the list changes, because everybody's typically things don't come off the list. Once it's on the list, it's on the list. But when new people come in, it's, oh, we didn't think about that. We got to add that to the list, right? So to answer your question around confidence level, we rely heavily with both of our major clients. We rely heavily on their feedback, right? So we don't make this list in a vacuum and then present it to our client and say, here are all the hazards, that's all you need to take care of. There are some theme parks that operate that way, that are not Disney and Universal, right? Because they don't have their own teams. They haven't been doing it for as long. They don't know. And they want you to go in and say, like, yeah, this is all you need to think about. We really don't like doing that, because it's a lot of risk, right? How are you sure you've thought of everything? So with the big two, it's very much a collaborative effort. And there are lots of people who have been doing this a very, very long time and know what's important and know what's not. So, for a young guy like me hasn't been working for 10 years yet, leaning on those people with a lot of experience to say, well, what are we working towards, is very helpful. Both companies adopt the TUV functional safety standards as part of an industry standard. So the same functional safety requirements that are used not only in factories, but on trains, because what's unique about our application is that we are asking a known, like I don't want to say a nobody, that's a horrible thing to say, but not somebody who is not familiar at all with the workings of a ride, to sit on a thing, and we're going to launch you 70 miles an hour down a track, and we're going to have animatronic whatevers reaching down at you, right, while you're going through that. Like, the expectation for the person riding that's exposed to a lot of the hazards, it's the same thing as getting on an airplane. Right. It's the same level of care that's given to that. So there's that. It's a lot of experience. We adopt international standards to derive these lists and to address them, and to use performance level equipment or standard or safety integrity level based equipment in all of our stuff, to make sure that sensors are not going to fail, right? Or when they do, we have them covered. There's lots of redundancy. We've got the likelihood, the mean time to failure of any of these devices is so long outside of the realm of possibility that the likelihood is act of God, right? To that level. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Questions for Chuck, feel free to drop those in the chat. Keep going, Chuck. I think we got a couple more minutes, and if we have any questions pop up, I'll interject.
Yeah, I don't really have a whole lot more. This is kind of where the end of it was. Yeah, I can keep talking and talk about
Excellent. Well, I
fun
think
stuff.
if
But
we're reaching the natural end, I think that the
yeah,
timing works out really
with
well.
3 minutes left, I think give everybody 3 minutes back.
Right. A couple of things before we end today, and a huge thanks to Chuck for coming on today and talking about his experience and the constellation of many things that are on his mind on any given day. We are, of course, still looking for topics and presenters for future First Fridays at Fusion Studio. If you are interested in providing a topic, go navigate to rebrand.ly/first-friday-topics. Rachel just dropped that in the chat. If you'd like to watch recordings of past Fusion First Friday events on our website, go to centers.purdue.edu/fusion-studio. And then finally, early bird registration for the 2026 Symposium on Education and Entertainment and Engineering opens in January of 2026, so keep an eye out for that. Again, Chuck, thanks so much for being with us today. Thanks to our attendees for coming, and we wish everybody a happy and safe holiday season. We'll see you in February for our next round. Again, thanks everyone, and happy holidays.